Free! That's how we felt living in a new century. Free and modern, too. The old limits of time and distance seemed to evaporate. For the first time, we were flying through the air. The telephone was still pretty new, too. Suddenly, faraway friends could be near at hand. And cars. Sure, those early cars could be unpredictable. But we'd never known such freedom. Imagine, even electric lights were magic and new. Anything seemed possible. Then the war came and changed everything. America had been riding high. We saw ourselves as a great power, right up there with Britain and France. So in 1914, when they and the rest of Europe went to war, I knew we couldn't stay on the sidelines forever. Me neither. I volunteered in 1917, on the very day President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. In no time, we were off to Europe. Funny, though, our modern conveniences went to war just as fast. Airplanes, telephones, cars, they all just made the killing more efficient. Made the war get bigger, too. So big that we called it World War. 100,000 Americans died, even though we were over there just a few months. We won, by the way. Along with the British, the French, we beat those Germans. When peace came in 1918, what a time we had. Even on the winning side, though, the war left a bitter taste. President Wilson wanted the U.S. to join the League of Nations. Because the League would bring nations together in a single group, Wilson hoped it could guarantee world peace. The rest of us weren't feeling that hopeful anymore. Most Americans wanted isolation. We wanted to pull back to the safety of our own shores. So the U.S. never did join the League of Nations. Instead, we drew back. In fact, most of us had had just about enough of the outside world.
Time marches on. So does our nation. Once, we moved toward the frontier, from more settled parts of our own land, from Europe and the rest of the world. But the 20th century brought 3 new migrations. The first big migration began in the teens, around World War I. The fighting in Europe had cut off immigration, America's traditional source of cheap labor. So factories in the Northeast and Midwest looked elsewhere for workers. They found them in the rural South. Opportunities there were limited. Northern cities were no paradise, but they offered a chance for work. Thousands of Southerners, white and black alike, set out for the North. That was the first big migration, but not the last. Other Americans were leaving the farm for the factory too, and they came not just from the South, but from all over the country. Because improved farm machinery kept reducing the need for workers, and because, even after World War I ended, new laws restricted immigration, again cutting off foreign labor. Instead of immigrants, American farmers were pouring into the factories, and that was the period's second major migration. Time kept passing. The country moved into a decade of hard times, called the Great Depression. And our century's third big migration began. This time it started in the Great Plains. where natural disaster and human mismanagement had turned the landscape into a dust bowl. And many people headed west. Mainly, they went to California, which, despite the Depression, was becoming one of the world's richest farming regions. From south to north, from farm to factory, from the disaster of the Dust Bowl to the promise of California. 3 great migrations in the first third of this century.
It is 1939, and we have had 10 years of hard times. They call it the Great Depression. Millions of workers unemployed. Thousands of banks and businesses ruined. Countless hopes and dreams gone forever. Maybe most of all on the Great Plains. It was always a dry sort of place. Then it was cursed with 6 years of drought. A natural disaster, but people made it worse. Plowed up so much of the grassland, grazed so many animals, the dry soil blew away. The sky grew full and dark for days at a time. The land itself was carried away by the winds. So much of the Great Plains that now it's called the Dust Bowl. Natural disaster and human tragedy. With every ruined farm, there's a family with little hope left. The Dust Bowl is just part of the Depression, and President Roosevelt wants action. All along, he's cooked up one government agency after another to revive the economy by tackling the big problems and by creating jobs. True to form, Roosevelt created new agencies for the Dust Bowl, too. So government workers are turning millions of acres back to grass, teaching farmers about contour plowing, which keeps the soil in place, and planting trees in long rows called windbreaks, which helps out too. On a broader scale than ever before, the government is trying to manage an entire landscape, not only in the Dust Bowl either. At the Tennessee Valley Authority, down south, the government is building dams to control floods. Out west, there's Boulder Dam for irrigation and cheap electricity. And the Civilian Conservation Corps, replanting forest lands all over the country. There has been sadness and strength, hope in the face of hopelessness, and mighty new efforts to rebuild our nation from the ground up.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Operator.
Hello?
Operator.
Hello? Hello?
Sir, I can hear you just fine. You needn't shout.
Jeepers! There's somebody inside this thing!
The telephone. What we take for granted started out as a revolution. Until the 20th century, people had relied mainly on letters to communicate with distant friends and relations. But the telephone was changing all that, crossing great distances, speeding things up. And letters were speeding up too. By airmail, by telephone, words had taken wing. And for the first time, pictures were on the move too. The movies. There, in the dark, an entire nation laughed and cried and took it all in, together. By the 1930s, millions of Americans went to the movies every week. For a dime, they saw 2 feature films, plus a cartoon, a short subject, and a newsreel. For many, the movie newsreel quickly became the main source of information. They showed us what was going on at home and abroad. The movies, the newsreels, they showed how Americans were alike. And because people imitated what they saw, movies and newsreels often strengthened those similarities. And they showed the many ways we weren't alike. Sometimes that growing awareness helped deepen the differences. Radio played a similar role. The first commercial station went on the air in 1920. Within a decade, millions were tuning in. Separated by thousands of miles, we laughed at the same jokes and followed the same games. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was wise to the power of mass communication, using radio to deliver what he called fireside chats.
I am happy to speak to you from my home.
Roosevelt's down-to-earth phrasing and his inspiring tone attracted audiences across the land. In the 1940s, one subject the president brought up repeatedly was the war in Europe. Under Adolf Hitler, Germany had overrun its neighbors one by one. Italy had even joined forces with Germany. Together, they were known as the Axis powers. In all of Western Europe, Britain was the only Allied power that remained free to resist. In Asia, Japan had joined the Axis powers and was on the march. But most Americans didn't want to get involved. They felt safe. The war seemed so distant. Even Roosevelt's pleas to help England from afar met with widespread resistance at first. Eventually, though, Americans heard a radio news item that changed their minds instantly.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.
Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed.
No longer untouched, the nation had entered World War II against Japan, Germany, and Italy. The war was fought far away, but it had a vast American audience, witness to every battle, every defeat, every victory. For the movie newsreel had become the nation's eyes, radio its ears, the telephone had become its voice. More than ever before, we were connected to each other and the rest of the world. And never again would we be able to tune it out. Not any of it.
How did World War II affect America?
It did what even President Roosevelt couldn't. That war ended the Depression. He tried everything, but barely made a dent. Until the war brought all that industry.
How did World War II affect America?
I couldn't believe it. A U.S. citizen all my life. But suddenly, just because we had Japanese names, my family was dragged off to a camp, thrown in with strangers, treated like something contagious.
How did World War II affect America?
Our forces overseas? We needed to keep them supplied. So finally, they gave women a chance. It's stopped fussing about how we were too feminine for heavy work. After that, the country never was the same.
How did World War II affect America?
300,000 American soldiers dead. Almost 1 million injured. Though the fighting never reached here, I still don't know how we ever got back to normal.
How did World War II affect America? How did World War II affect America?
4 years of war. And we beat Japan and Germany. With help from our allies, Britain and the Soviet Union. That victory was so sweet. But we were afraid it would all happen again. Weren't the only ones. The Soviet Union had lost 20 million people in the war. They were petrified. The war had taken them into Central and Eastern Europe, and the Soviets wanted to stay in control there. For protection, they said. But we thought influence in Europe was vital for our protection too. So there we were, the United States, the Soviet Union, allies 1 minute, squaring off the next.
How did World War II affect America?
The Soviet Union is communist, you know. We were so sure they were trying to spread communism. Believe it or not, in America, we saw a red under every bed. Lots of fine people were ruined in the hysteria.
How did World War II affect America?
That old idea of a world organization to keep the peace, it got resurrected. Not the League of Nations like after World War I. This time it was the United Nations. Boy, did we put a lot of hope into that.
How did World War II affect America?
We were finally part of a world community. That community was divided, with conflict after conflict. But there was no going back to the safety of our own shores. Not then, not now, not ever again.
Ladies and gentlemen, our special report on population has been transformed into some kind of weather report. Again, please stand by.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the WGTV Migration Report. Before tomorrow's forecast, a review of earlier trends. Looking back, we see a long, stormy period, with increased activity in the far west, Midwest, and Northeast that drew large masses out of the south. Eventually, calmer conditions prevailed and brought a return to old patterns. Yet the winds continued to shift, bringing brighter prospects for the nation as a whole with localized highs and lows, including new lows in many downtown areas and record highs in the suburbs. In the same period, a drift to the south and west, set off by milder climates there and other environmental trends. Next up, turbulence in Cuba and heavy weather in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean islands pushed large masses toward calmer, more promising conditions on the mainland, changing our weather considerably. Then, violent winds battered Southeast Asia, launching big waves across the Pacific, and creating new weather patterns, mostly in coastal areas of the U.S. During the same period, continuing tropical depression in Mexico met up with more promising weather across the border, setting off a sizable inflow to the U.S. and a flurry of activity in southwestern border states. More recently, we see the continuation of earlier trends toward the Sun Belt, and movement into the Sun Belt helped produce an even gloomier outlook in parts of the Midwest and Northeast, which at last brings us to our forecast. Currently around the nation, expect unsettled conditions to continue, with a chance of steady accumulations on all fronts. Well, that's it for today, but stay tuned for more of GTV.
Well, if I have to write a report on cities, I guess I'll start with the dictionary. Let's see. City. A large population center. Okay, I know that. Every city has lots of people. Lots of different kinds, too. What else? A transportation center. Yeah, like a port, or where rail lines, or roads, or even flight paths come together. And a center for business and industry, where, offices, stores. Sometimes they're right on top of each other. And factories, usually they're off on their own. Let's see now. There's more, where the inhabitants perform widely varied tasks. That's a mouthful. Oh, I get it. City people do lots of different jobs. What next? A center of arts and learning. Right, museums, theaters, jazz even. A permanent center with its own government. City Hall. Fine, that's it for the definition, which tells a lot about what cities are and what they do. But the question was, American cities. What are they like today? I'm supposed to figure out what cities are and how they're changing. Here, right at home, San Francisco's a city for sure. But how much has it changed? It's always been a center for trade and banking. But the buildings do keep getting taller. The people keep changing. The port has even moved out of town. And outside the city limits, it's just grown and grown, thanks to cars mostly. Same thing everywhere. Out there along the freeways, there's lots of places that remind me of cities. But I don't know if we call them that. Like old-fashioned cities, they sure do have lots of people, offices, stores, and lots of jobs. People do make music there, put on shows, see movies, just like downtown. And those places out there along the roadside do look pretty permanent. They might have governments, too. But what do you call them? Suburbs. Doesn't sound right. They're too big, too busy. And out there, everybody's in their cars. So these new places don't look like old-fashioned cities either. No, most old cities have tight, crowded centers, and these new places are so spread out. Sometimes it looks as though they'll never end. Still, they do have centers, really. Maybe just some tall buildings, more often the mall, with shops and movies and all. It's like a new downtown. Now I'm getting somewhere. These new places beside the road, they are cities, even if we don't know what to call them.
The U.S. in the 50s, the richest country on Earth. Plenty of food, easy transportation. Each family on its own plot of land. That was the dream. For some, it became the reality, too. A reality based on plenty of energy and plenty of space. Even if one resource ran low, we could always come up with another. The Earth was inexhaustible, indestructible. Or so it seemed, according to the dream. In the 50s and after, though, other evidence kept piling up. Evidence that the Earth required more careful handling. More recently, we've learned about new problems. Invisible, at least at first. What we can see is bad enough. What we can't see may be even worse. The way we produce food, for example. It depends on animal feed, on fertilizers and insecticides that wash away, unseen, into streams and rivers, into our water supply, and transportation. Sometimes car exhaust just floats away, or seems to, yet it can turn a cool, clear sky into a hot, dense blanket. Lighting and heating our homes. Producing that energy also produces wastes. Worse yet, these problems are no longer merely local, or even national. Carried by the wind, by the sea, they've all gone global. Emissions from U.S. factories, for instance, ignore the Canadian border. Riding the wind, they fall there as acid rain, destroying forests, poisoning lakes and streams. In the Soviet Union, an accident at the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl forced thousands to evacuate and altered the environment across Europe. How seriously and for how long, no one knows. All over the world, everyday ways of life cause problems, both seen and unseen, at home and far away, because every place is linked to every other. Long after the 50s, we're just beginning to figure out all the connections between distant places, between the environment and our way of life. Jobs, the price of food, the easy way we use things up and toss them away. Is it worth it? Should we change? What are we willing to give up? Whatever the answers, one thing is clear. We are all in this together, crowded into the same landscape, drinking the same water, breathing the same air, our dreams unfolding under the same uncertain sky.
You have always known me. Oh, the places we've been together, the things we've seen. How much I've shown you, how much I've told you, how much remains to you, how much remains to